When someone takes you for granted, it's not because you weren't good enough. It's not because you didn't try hard enough, love deep enough, or give them enough chances. It's because they never truly valued what they had while they had it. The problem isn't you. It's their inability to recognize your worth. But here's where people get stuck. They internalize the rejection, the neglect, and the lack of appreciation. And they start questioning themselves. They ask, what did I do wrong? Or was I not enough? And that's the trap. That's where the cycle of self-doubt and negative feelings begins to take over. But the truth is, their blindness does not define your brilliance. You see, when someone gets comfortable with your presence, they start treating your kindness as a given. They assume you'll always be there no matter what. They start expecting your patience, your loyalty, your forgiveness as if it's their right rather than a privilege. And the more you give, the less they appreciate. It's a cruel irony, but it's a pattern that plays out time and time again. People don't always value what's easy, what's constant, what's always available. They take for granted the things they believe they can always have access to. And this is where the shift needs to happen. Not in their behavior, but in your perception of the situation. When you realize that you were never the problem, you free yourself from the burden of trying to prove your worth to someone who couldn't see it. You stop blaming yourself for their lack of appreciation. You stop trying to change yourself in order to fit into their idea of what they want. And instead, you start recognizing that the issue was never about you not being enough. It was about them not being capable of valuing what they had. Think about it. How many times did you go out of your way to make things easier for them? How many times did you sacrifice your own needs to accommodate theirs? How often did you suppress your own feelings just to keep the peace, to avoid an argument, to make sure they were happy, even at the expense of your own happiness? And how many times did they acknowledge it? How often did they genuinely appreciate you for all that you did? If they truly saw you, if they truly valued you, they wouldn't have made you feel invisible. But that's the thing about people who take others for granted. They only realize what they had when it's no longer there. The moment you pull away, the moment you stop being their emotional crutch, the moment you stop catering to their needs while ignoring your own, that's when they start to notice. That's when the regret sets in. But by then, it's not your concern anymore. Because once you truly understand that you were never the problem, you no longer seek their validation. You no longer wait for an apology that may never come. You no longer need closure. Because the closure is in knowing that you deserved better all along. People who take others for granted operate from a place of entitlement. They assume that no matter what they do, no matter how they treat you, you'll always be there. They assume that your love, your support, your energy is an unlimited resource that they can tap into whenever they please. But love is not a guarantee. Respect is not a guarantee. Presence is not a guarantee. Everything has its limits. Even the most patient person reaches a point where they say, enough. And when that moment comes, it's a game changer. You see, when someone takes you for granted, they aren't just underestimating your worth. They're exposing their own limitations. They are revealing their inability to recognize something valuable before it slips away. That's not a reflection of you. That's a reflection of their mindset, their immaturity, their inability to appreciate what is real. And the moment you recognize this, you stop wasting your time trying to convince them of your worth. You stop explaining yourself. You stop waiting for them to wake up and suddenly see what they failed to see all along. Because if they couldn't recognize your value when you were giving them the best of you, why should they be given another chance to appreciate you now? And here's something else to think about. When you finally step back, when you finally reclaim your energy and redirect it towards yourself, you begin to see just how much you were giving away without receiving anything in return. You start noticing the ways in which you were settling. You start realizing that you deserved reciprocity, not just empty words or broken promises. And that's when the real transformation happens. Because once you recognize your own worth, you stop tolerating anything less than what you deserve. You stop making excuses for people who couldn't appreciate you. You stop allowing yourself to be in situations where your value isn't recognized. So no, you were never the problem. Your kindness was never the problem. Your love, your patience, your effort, it was never the issue. The issue was with the person who couldn't see it. The issue was with their lack of awareness, their inability to value something rare and genuine. And that's not your burden to carry anymore. Silence is one of the most powerful tools you can use when someone has taken you for granted. People expect reactions. They expect explanations. They expect you to fight for them, to beg, to prove your worth, to keep the conversation going even when they have disrespected you. And that expectation is where their power lies. The moment you take that away, the moment you stop explaining yourself, stop seeking understanding, stop reacting emotionally, you change the entire dynamic. They no longer control the situation. They no longer have the comfort of knowing you'll always be there, ready to explain, ready to forgive, ready to try harder. Suddenly, they are left with nothing but the silence. And that silence speaks louder than any words ever could. People who take others for granted operate from a place of certainty. They assume that no matter how they treat you, you'll always respond. Whether you're arguing, crying, or pleading your case, you are still engaged with them. And as long as you are engaged, they still have access to you. They still have the ability to influence your emotions, to manipulate the situation, to string you along with breadcrumbs of attention and false promises. But silence changes that. Silence forces them to sit with their own actions, with their own thoughts, with the realization that they may have just lost something they never thought they would lose. When you stop explaining, stop responding, stop justifying your feelings, it does something to people who are used to taking advantage of your kindness. It makes them uncomfortable. It forces them to question their own behavior. Because now they are no longer in control of the situation. They don't get the reassurance of knowing how you feel, of knowing that you still care, of knowing that they can come back whenever they please. And that uncertainty is what shakes them to their core. There's a reason why people panic when they are met with silence. It forces them to confront themselves. It forces them to wonder what went wrong, to analyze the situation, to replay their actions in their minds. And suddenly, they are faced with the harsh reality that maybe, just maybe, they took the wrong person for granted. That maybe they pushed too far. That maybe they made a mistake. And this is where the shift happens, because while they are sitting there wondering, doubting, regretting, you are already moving forward. Silence also protects you from unnecessary pain. When someone has hurt you, the last thing you need to do is keep engaging with them. Every word you speak, every time you try to explain yourself, you are giving them another opportunity to manipulate the situation. You are giving them another chance to twist the narrative, to gaslight you, to make you feel like you are overreacting or being unreasonable. But when you remove yourself from the conversation completely, you take away their ability to influence your emotions. You reclaim your power. You show them without saying a word that you are no longer willing to tolerate being taken for granted. People will notice when you stop talking. They will notice when you no longer reach out, no longer ask questions, no longer try to fix things. And that absence will feel heavier than any words you could ever say. Because in that silence, they are left with nothing but their own thoughts. And those thoughts will start to haunt them. They will start to wonder why you haven't reacted, why you haven't fought for them, why you haven't tried to mend the situation like you always have before. And the more time that passes, the more they start to feel the weight of their own actions. Silence creates distance, and distance creates clarity. When you step back, you begin to see the situation for what it truly was, not for what you hoped it would be. You start to realize how much you were giving to someone who wasn't giving the same energy in return. You start to recognize how many times you made excuses for them, how many times you overlooked red flags, how many times you accepted less than what you deserved just because you wanted to believe in their potential. But silence strips away the illusion. It forces you to see things clearly, and once you do, you can never unsee it. The people who truly care about you will never put you in a position where you feel like you have to beg for respect, for effort, for appreciation. And the people who don't care, they will only realize your worth once your silence forces them to. But by then, it's no longer about them. It's about you. It's about choosing yourself over people who fail to see your value when they had the chance. It's about understanding that not everyone deserves access to you. Not everyone deserves an explanation. Not everyone deserves your energy. And once you embrace that, once you truly understand the power of silence, everything changes. When someone takes you for granted, the most dangerous thing you can do is believe that their actions define your worth. It's easy to internalize their neglect, to mistake their lack of appreciation as a reflection of your own value. But that's the trap. That's the mental prison that keeps so many people stuck, replaying moments in their mind, wondering if they should have done something differently, questioning whether they were enough. And that cycle of self-doubt is exactly what keeps them in a place of emotional bondage, unable to move forward, unable to see themselves clearly. The truth is, being taken for granted is not a reflection of you. It's a reflection of the person who failed to see your worth. But in order to truly break free, you have to reclaim your identity. You have to remind yourself who you are. Separate from their inability to appreciate you. People who take others for granted are often operating from a place of entitlement. They assume that no matter how they behave, no matter how little effort they put in, you will always be there. They get comfortable with the idea that you'll always be available, always forgiving, always understanding. And the more they assume this, the less effort they put into valuing you. This isn't because you lack value, it's because they never learned how to appreciate something without the fear of losing it. But just because someone else cannot see your worth doesn't mean it's not there. It doesn't mean you weren't good enough. It simply means they were blind to what they had, and that blindness is their loss, not yours. The biggest mistake people make when they've been taken for granted is allowing the situation to make them feel small. They start shrinking themselves, making themselves less, dimming their own light in response to someone who couldn't see them clearly. They withdraw, they suppress their emotions, they lose confidence in their own value. And over time, they start believing the lies that neglect whispers, that maybe they weren't special, that maybe they were easy to replace, that maybe they just weren't worth the effort. But that's not the truth. That's the distortion that happens when you allow someone else's actions to dictate your self-perception. Your worth was never tied to their ability to appreciate you. Your value was never dependent on their recognition of it. The problem was never that you weren't enough. The problem was that they didn't have the capacity to recognize what was in front of them. And the moment you understand this, the moment you truly internalize it, something inside of you shifts. You stop seeking closure. You stop waiting for an apology. You stop trying to make sense of their choices. Because you realize that it was never about you lacking something. It was about them being incapable of recognizing what they had. One of the most powerful things you can do when someone has taken you for granted is to remind yourself of who you are. You have to reclaim your confidence, your energy, your self-respect. And that starts with shifting your focus away from them and back onto yourself. Too often people stay stuck because they spend too much time analyzing the other person. Why did they act that way? Why didn't they appreciate me? Will they ever realize what they lost? But the more you focus on them, the more you keep yourself tied to their energy. And that's exactly what you need to break free from. Instead, you need to redirect all that energy back into yourself. You need to remind yourself of what makes you unique, what makes you powerful, what makes you irreplaceable. You need to start treating yourself the way you wished they had treated you. You need to start speaking to yourself with kindness, reminding yourself every single day that you are valuable, that you are worthy of love and respect, that you deserve people in your life who recognize your worth without needing to lose you first. This is where real healing begins. When you stop looking outward for validation and start looking inward for self-acceptance. When you stop trying to prove your worth to people who were blind to it and start living in a way that honors who you are. Because when you do this, something incredible happens. You stop attracting people who take you for granted. You stop tolerating relationships that make you feel small. You stop accepting the bare minimum because you finally realize that you are meant for more. People who don't appreciate you will always regret it eventually. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but at some point, when they see you thriving without them, when they realize that you were the kind of person they'll never find again, the regret will hit. But by then, it won't matter because you won't need their recognition. You won't need their validation. You will have already found something more valuable, yourself. The moment you recognize that someone has taken you for granted, you have to shift your energy away from them and back onto yourself. Too many people waste time trying to make the other person understand what they lost, trying to prove their worth, trying to remind them of all the things they did that went unnoticed. But that's where the mistake is made. The more you try to make someone see your value, the more you are reinforcing the very dynamic that allowed them to take you for granted in the first place. The truth is, people only start to realize your worth when you stop making yourself available to them. When you stop explaining, when you stop reminding, when you stop proving. People get comfortable when they know they can treat you a certain way and still have access to you. They assume that no matter how little effort they put in, no matter how many times they neglect you, you'll still be there, still answering their calls, still showing up when they need you, still holding on to hope that they'll finally see what's right in front of them. And the longer you allow that pattern to continue, the more it solidifies. They don't see a reason to change because they don't feel like they have anything to lose. The moment they start to feel your absence, the moment they sense that you are no longer available at their convenience, the shift begins. But this shift is not about them. It's about you. It's about reclaiming your energy and redirecting it where it belongs, into yourself. You have to take all of the love, effort, and care that you were pouring into someone else and start pouring it back into yourself. You have to stop making excuses for them and start making commitments to yourself. You have to decide that your peace is more important than their inconsistency, that your self-respect is more valuable than their attention, that your happiness does not depend on whether or not they finally recognize what they had. This is not about playing games or trying to manipulate them into chasing you. It's about recognizing that your time and energy are precious and that they should not be given freely to those who do not cherish them. It's about understanding that the only way to truly teach someone your worth is to show them that you are not afraid to walk away when they fail to see it. And more importantly, it's about showing yourself that you don't need their recognition to validate your value. The healing process begins the moment you stop looking for validation outside of yourself. The moment you stop needing them to regret losing you. Stop waiting for them to wake up and realize what they had. Stop craving closure from someone who never truly appreciated you in the first place. You don't need their apology. You don't need their guilt. You don't need them to admit that they were wrong. What you need is to turn inward and ask yourself why you allowed someone who didn't value you to have so much of your energy. And once you find that answer, you have to make the decision to never let it happen again. Healing is not just about moving on. It's about evolving. It's about becoming the version of yourself that will never tolerate being taken for granted again. It's about developing the kind of self-worth that makes it impossible for you to stay in spaces where you are not valued. It's about setting standards, enforcing boundaries, and recognizing that anyone who truly cares about you will never put you in a position where you have to question your worth. The people who took you for granted will notice your absence. They will feel it when you stop responding, when you stop making an effort, when you stop chasing, when you stop trying to fix what they broke. And they will have to sit with the realization that they had something rare, something valuable, something they will never find again. But by the time they realize it, it won't matter, because you will have already built a life so full, so rich, so complete that their absence will feel like nothing more than a distant memory. There comes a point when you have to accept that not everyone will see your value, and that's not your burden to carry. It is not your job to convince someone to appreciate you, nor is it your responsibility to make them realize what they lost. The harsh truth is that some people will only understand your worth once they no longer have access to you. But by then, you will have already outgrown the version of yourself that tolerated their neglect. People who take others for granted do so because they assume they will always be there. They operate from a mindset of entitlement, believing that no matter how little effort they put in, you will still show up. They convince themselves that your loyalty is permanent, that your kindness is an endless resource, that your love comes without conditions. But love without respect is not love. It is self-betrayal. And if you continue to make yourself available to someone who does not value you, you are not only betraying yourself, but you are also teaching them that their behavior is acceptable. It is easy to fall into the trap of thinking that if you just hold on a little longer, if you just give them a little more time, they will eventually change. You tell yourself that maybe they are just going through something, that maybe they don't realize how they are making you feel, that maybe they will wake up one day and finally treat you the way you deserve. But that day never comes, because they have no reason to change as long as you keep accepting their half-hearted efforts. The moment you decide to walk away from someone who took you for granted, you take back your power. You remove yourself from the cycle of disappointment and step into a space of self-respect. You stop waiting for them to appreciate you and start appreciating yourself. And in doing so, you begin to realize that the person you were waiting for was never them, it was you. You were waiting for yourself to wake up. You were waiting for yourself to recognize your own worth. You were waiting for yourself to finally say, it is not easy to walk away from someone you care about, even when you know they have been taking you for granted. The heart holds on to hope, even when the mind knows the truth. You will find yourself wanting to reach out, wanting to remind them of the good times, wanting to believe that maybe, just maybe, they will finally realize what you meant to them. But that is an illusion. If they truly valued you, they would not have needed to lose you to see it. You must shift your focus from what they failed to do to what you deserve. You deserve consistency. You deserve effort. You deserve someone who does not make you question your worth. You deserve a love that does not require you to beg for attention or prove your value. And the only way to attract that kind of love is to first give it to yourself. Self-respect is knowing when to walk away. It is understanding that your time, energy, and love are too valuable to be wasted on someone who does not cherish them. It is realizing that you do not have to prove your worth to anyone, especially not to someone who failed to see it when you were right in front of them. The right people will never need to be convinced to value you. They will recognize your worth from the start, and they will treat you accordingly. People often come back when they realize they can no longer take you for granted. They return when they see you thriving without them, when they notice that you are no longer waiting for them to change, when they understand that their absence did not break you, it made you stronger. And in that moment, you will have a choice. You can allow them back in and risk falling into the same cycle, or you can keep moving forward, knowing that you deserve better. The greatest revenge against someone who took you for granted is success. Success in healing, success in self-growth, success in creating a life that is full, rich, and abundant without them. When you stop seeking validation from others and start giving it to yourself, you become untouchable. You become someone who no longer tolerates half efforts, who no longer accepts being taken for granted, who no longer settles for anything less than what they deserve. And that is the kind of power that cannot be ignored. When someone takes you for granted, the natural reaction is to feel anger, resentment, and the overwhelming need to make them regret it. You want them to feel the pain they caused you, to suffer the way you suffered, to finally understand what they lost when they neglected you. But the real power does not come from revenge or from trying to make them feel guilty. It comes from detaching completely. True power is found in your ability to move on, to rebuild yourself, to become so unbothered by their absence that they have no choice but to notice. People who take others for granted operate under one assumption, that you will always be there. They believe they can neglect you, disrespect you, or dismiss your feelings without consequence. They assume that no matter what they do, you will continue to show up, to forgive, to try harder, to prove your worth. This is where you must break the cycle. The moment you recognize that you are being taken for granted, you must remove yourself. Not as a game, not as a manipulation tactic, but as an act of self-respect. You do not need to announce your departure. You do not need to warn them or explain yourself. You simply disappear from their reach. And in that absence, they will be forced to face the reality of what they lost. Silence is more powerful than any confrontation. When you stop arguing, stop pleading, stop trying to get them to see your worth, they will be left with nothing but the echo of their own actions. They will expect you to react, to chase, to seek closure. When you do none of those things, they will be unsettled. They will start to wonder. They will feel the shift in energy. And for the first time, they will understand that you were not someone they could afford to lose. But by then, it will be too late. Because the version of you that once tolerated their behavior no longer exists. The transformation happens in the space between leaving and healing. In that space, you will be tempted to look back, to wonder if they are missing you, to hope for some grand realization on their part. That is where you must redirect your focus. You are not healing for them. You are not moving on to make them suffer. You are doing this for yourself. Because the life that is waiting for you is one that does not include being undervalued. It is one where you no longer tolerate half-hearted love, where you no longer invest in people who do not invest in you, where you no longer seek validation from those who were blind to your worth. As you distance yourself, you will start to realize how much energy you wasted on trying to make someone appreciate you. You will feel lighter, freer, more in control. And with that freedom comes the clarity that you never needed them in the first place. The love, the attention, the appreciation you were seeking from them was always meant to come from within you. The moment you understand that, you become unstoppable. You become someone who no longer waits for love to be given, but who creates it within themselves. Time will pass, and they will start to notice your absence in ways they never expected. They will look for you in places they once overlooked. They will wonder why your energy no longer surrounds them, why your presence no longer fills their world. They will try to reach out to test if they still have access to you. But access is a privilege, not a right. And when you take that privilege away, they will finally understand that losing you was not just a small mistake. It was the greatest loss they ever experienced. You will have moments of weakness, moments where you question if you made the right choice, moments where the comfort of the past seems tempting. But every time you feel that pull, remind yourself of the pain of being taken for granted. Remember how it felt to be ignored, to be undervalued, to be given only what was convenient for them. That is not love. That is not respect. That is not what you deserve. And so you continue forward. Not for them, not to make them suffer, but for yourself. Because the best revenge is not in making them regret. It is in becoming someone who no longer even considers them worth thinking about. When you reach that place, you will know you have won, not by making them hurt, but by making yourself whole.